This video is brought to you by AKSIAS.
Good morning all. Welcome to AKSIAS. My name is Uday. I am a history faculty here. Today we are here as part of the initiative of the institute to provide an analysis on the ongoing 2022 UPSC mains question papers. Okay. And today I will be taking up the questions from General Studies paper 1 which are related to history, my component history, fine. But then even before I start with the discussion, there are a few aspects I would like to share on the general nature of this year's question papers. One thing is very clear is that the UPSC has gone with the logic of the basics. It has really not gone with a very complicated aspects. It has kept it very simple, and those candidates who have done their preparation with the basic NCERTs and the standard textbooks, they should have done a very decent job, at least as far as my subject goes, history. Okay. And we at AKSIAS provide each student with a set of all the basic NCERT textbooks so that they need not buy them by themselves. And even in the classroom program, the basic NCERT textbooks are given the most importance, the greatest importance, and we keep stressing the qualitative superiority that you find in the NCERTs, which are tailored into our regular classroom program. Fine. So let me now get started with the questions on history. Even before I start taking each individual question and analyze them, let us look at the overall analysis of the history section. So you will see how many number of questions have been asked. 6 questions have been asked out of 20, and they are coming around to total 75 marks out of 250 marks. So not a great weightage, but still a decent weightage, which is coming around 30% of the marks. Not only that, if you look at the level of difficulty, this is the weightage part. The level of difficulty is that unlike previous years, this year's all the 6 questions, as I just now said, that they have come from basics, and any candidate who has done his basic work can easily answer all of these questions without leaving a single one. So the level of difficulty, I will say, it was like on the border of easy to medium. But here is the catch, that when it is easy and when they have come from standard textbooks, it is easy for all the candidates who are writing the exam. So now how do you get that extra marginal marks over the other is that because they are easy for everyone, you will have to get an edge over others through your presentation and by understanding the real demand of the question and being very, very relevant. Instead of writing whatever you know about the topic, you should try to address the exact question, demand of the question. Because everyone will write a lot of points on this, then how will you be different? The way you present it and the relevance. And if you look at the last aspect about the overall analysis is the distribution, is that all these 6 questions have come from have been distributed very uniformly across all modules. For example, from culture, art and culture, there is 1 question. From world history, there is 1 question. From post-independence, there is 1 question. And the most important component, that is modern, there were 3 questions. So it's a very decent paper doing justice to all the modules of history. And even the questions picked up from these different modules are not random topics. They are easily the most main themes. They have asked on main themes. For example, in modern India, they asked a question on Gandhi. They asked a question on moderate phase. They asked a question on social religious reform movements. So these are some things which are present in the NCERTs directly, as well discussed in the classroom, and anyone has done basic work, they can easily write these answers. And in art and culture, it came from Bhakti movement. Bhakti movement, we all know, is an important theme. And in world history, it was on world wars, period between world wars, and post-independence, it is related to princely states. So that is the overall analysis of the history paper for you all. Okay, history section. Now, before I again go into the individual answers for the 6 questions, let me talk something more general about the qualities of any good answer, not only history, any good answer in any topic, any paper. Now, generally, I'll suggest 2 formulas, is like the 4S formula and 3D formula. Again, I'm not saying that they are the only way that you should write your answer, but these things can help you to some extent, definitely. It's like the 4S. What do I mean by them? That is, your answer must have structure. Whatever you write, it must be in a structured manner. You may write 100 points, but if they are randomly organized, it will not impress the examiner. It will show a weak mind on your part, that you don't have clarity of thought. So your answer must be cleanly structured, organized, and it must be specific. You can't simply keep making statements without giving examples and justifying yourself with reason. Facts must be there. So when you talk about Bhakti movement, as you will see now, you simply can't say Bhakti movement was like this and that. You must use specific names and specific books, these things, by which you are showing your examiner that you are strong at facts also. And then you will have to be very short. Yes, you cannot write lengthy stories, no. And lastly, you have to be smart. That is, you must know the exact demand of the question. What is the question is asking about? Now there is a question we will see, it's about Bhakti movement. Now, how many marks is that question? 10 marks. And how many words is asking you to write? In 150 words. Now, if you open any book on Bhakti movement, there is so much of material that you can keep going on writing 10 pages also. But the task is to simplify and condense. So that is not easy. So you must answer those aspects of Bhakti movement which are asked in the question, not simply go on writing whatever you know. So you have to be smart. How much time you should spend for 10 marker question, how much time you should spend for 15 marker question. That is very, very important. Just because you know a lot about a given topic, you can't keep writing on and on and on. Okay. So very important. Structure, the first one. Where will you get the structure for the question? Believe me, you need not create your own structure. The structure is there inside the question itself. The moment you look at a question, you must look at the components. How many components that question has? And if you can address all the components in the question with the same headings, don't you think you already have a structure there? You already have a structure. And when also talking about structure, we also know, I am coming to the second aspect, 3D formula. We also know that a standard structure is this or no? Introduction, body, conclusion. It's a standard. Now, in introduction, body and conclusion, what should you write? You must write about whatever is asked in the question, that only you will write, no? So, when you read the question, identify the components, identify the keywords from each question, and many a time people say that your introduction must be so unique that it must attract the attention of the examiner in the question, examiner who is reading your paper, because they are correcting, the examiners are correcting hundreds of papers, and how will he like your answer? He or she will like your answer. Nothing like that. Don't believe all these things, because if you in your effort to write a very beautiful introduction for every question, you will eventually end up writing only a beautiful introduction only. The other parts of your answer will suffer. So please, if something strikes your mind spontaneously, you have got a beautiful point, that's okay. But don't spend too much of time to be unique. No need. Simply be straight, give a base, take the keyword in the entire question, whichever you think is the most important keyword, pick it up and write a broad definition for it, very broad definition. So introduction, you can generally, very safe side. I am not saying that is the only way to introduce. You can introduce in many ways. Particularly in my subject, easiest way is to go with definition. Okay. Next, in the body, you will have dimensions. Try to cover all the different dimensions, economic, political, social, religious, all these things. And so that the examiner will understand, oh, this person knows so many things. So you are showing your width of your knowledge, how much you have read, how much hard work you have done. And you will also have some positive aspects you must write and negative aspects also you must write. Generally, most cases, while discussing these, some positives and one or two negatives also. And lastly, in conclusion, you must give your decision. So that is the 3 Ds I am talking about. Final decision, that you will try to balance, and that decision should be in a balanced manner, Okay. If you can basically follow these, I think answer writing is not really very, very painful. You must enjoy the process actually, and UPSC is looking for those people who can have so much of knowledge. No, even if you have so much of knowledge, you should be able to communicate that knowledge in a simple, straight, structured manner. That's it. If you can do that, that is the ability UPSC is looking for. Okay. So with this, now let us go into the individual dealing with the individual questions of my subject history. I will follow the similar pattern. Okay. I will follow the similar pattern which I have just now discussed. Fine. The first question, evaluate the nature of the Bhakti movement and its contribution to Indian culture. Done. Already you can clearly see 2 components are there. What is asking you is asking you to evaluate what? The nature of Bhakti literature. This is one component, and means there is a second component also. Second component. So, is asking you nature of Bhakti literature and its contribution to Indian culture. So, both of these aspects you must understand, you must address. And can you clearly see the question, the structure is already ready for the question? Yes. Now, should this answer have an introduction or no? It must have an introduction. Now, how will you go with the introduction? Now, what is the key word in the entire question? Bhakti literature. Simply write that Bhakti literature, as I said, definition, no? In the first you must write definition. Easily you can write a definition. What is Bhakti literature? Bhakti literature is nothing but refers to a voluminous literary works written by some poets and saints, okay, as part of the Bhakti movement, which started in Tamil Nadu or South India around the 8th century, and starting from there eventually spread to entire country, entire India by the 15th century. That's it, sufficient. Now what are you saying? Did you cover so many aspects in the introduction or no? You are clearly telling the examiner that, sir, I know everything about Bhakti literature, I know about Bhakti movement, and I know the time when it started, when it ended, where it started, and where it spread, how did it spread throughout the entire country, as simple as that. And then without doing too much of drama, directly going to the question. Next, the introduction is done. So in the body, you must address 2 aspects or no? The nature of this Bhakti literature. In the introduction, you have only defined it. You did not discuss about its nature. Now you will have to discuss, and then you will also have to discuss about its contribution to Indian culture. So body must have 2 components. So in the body, obviously you will not give the headings like this, no? Body, this is the body, no. You will simply give the heading, nature of Bhakti literature. Nature of Bhakti literature. Now, what will you write nature of Bhakti literature? Just ask yourself basic questions. Now literature means some books, na? Someone should have written this. Okay, what are the aspects you will address here? Who wrote these books? What did they write in these books? What did they write? Stories, dramas, comedies? What did they write? Obviously there should be some themes. What themes did they write? And in which language did they write? Don't you think if you address these 3 points, you already have 3 bullet points for this? Yes. Addressing the first question, who wrote these books? Generally in India, the traditionally educated classes were the upper caste Hindus, the Brahmins mainly. But here what is very unique is that it is not only upper caste educated sections, upper caste educated elite, but so uniquely you find many people from low castes, lower castes, and even women were there in this literature, composed this literature. Now, again this is a general statement or no? Yes. What did I say? You should be specific. When you have said this, you must mention a few educated upper caste people who were there, like Shankaracharya, Adi Shankaracharya. You can write about Ramanuja, etc. Lower caste people, you can mention about Ravi Das, who was a cobbler. You can mention about Sena, who was a barber. And with respect to women, you can write about Andal in Tamil Nadu, South India, and you can also mention about Mirabai in North. So you see, have you given some specificity to your answer or no? Yes. Don't simply make statements like, yes, low caste people and women were also there. Now it's another issue that if you are not able to recollect it in the examination, it's okay. But if as much as possible, try to ensure that you be specific to your answer. So you see that 4S formula. Am I using the structure and 3D, the 3D and 4S and 3D? Yes. Definition. Now I am trying to dimensions, different dimensions, like nature. This is one dimension, this is second dimension. Simple. Next. So that is the first. Who? Now, what were they writing? On what issues they were writing? Second point, you can mention that the main theme of this literature, the main themes of this literature were stress on, for example, what did they say? What did they write? Stress on bhakti. That is, what do you mean by bhakti? It is like a strong emotional attachment with God. Emotional attachment with God. I'll continue in a different page. Strong emotional attachment with God. Instead of just performing rituals and reading scriptures. So what is the essence they are trying to say? You may read all the holy books, you may do all rituals, but still, if there is no purity in your heart, if there is no simplicity in your mind, if you don't treat your other people equally, your life is waste. You may be a great scholar, but waste. That is what they're trying to say. So this is one important theme, that you may read all the scriptures, you may perform all the rituals, but if you don't have an attachment to the God in your heart, if there is no simplicity, it's like. And the second theme you can say is that the literature also addressed the issue of the caste system and promoted equality, tried to promote equality. That is why we find, it is said, you are treating other people unequally. That is wrong, that is not correct, and that is why many scholars came from low caste, and even gender inequality also. That is why we find some women scholars also. second theme is done, second point. And then the third aspect you will write in this is which language they wrote. Now traditionally again for Hindu literature it was always Sanskrit language, but unlike that, the beauty of this Bhakti literature was that it was written in vernacular or regional languages. Vernacular or regional languages. But again, don't leave it in a general sense. You must write a few of them, like for example, in Tamil, in Kannada, that is Karnataka, in Maharashtra, in Marathi language, Hindi language. All these different languages came up during this period. And in Tamil, you can write one or two books like the Shaiva Tevaram. Those who have studied, you will understand what am I speaking about. And that is, there were some Shiva Bhaktas, Lord Shiva. And those people, their poems on Lord Shiva, their collection is called as Tevaram. And Vaishnava, that is, though there were several saints who were talking about, who were praising Vishnu, God Vishnu. And their book is called, their collection is called Divya Prabandham. Divya Prabandham. And in Kannada, there is some literature called Vachana Sahitya. Vachana Sahitya. And in Marathi, there were some poems called Abhangs. Abhangs. And in Hindi, you can give an example, Ramcharit Manas of Tulsidas. So by saying all this, you have telling when did this start, where did it start, how did it spread, and who wrote these books, what did they write about, and which language they used. All of these things you are communicating to the examiner. What else you will write? And you are writing in, you are giving a general statement, and you are also specifying facts, and you are justifying yourself in every way. Okay. Next, one more, but then that is the first component of your body. What is the second component? Contribution. So now, till now we have seen what is the literature, but what is the contribution of the literature to Indian culture? That will become the second heading of your body. Now you see, your body of your answer is having a structure or no? Introduction, body, conclusion. Introduction, definition, body, inside the body. You are taking the very question, the components of the question, and making it into a structure of your answer. Contribution to Indian culture. Again, you should try always write in bullet points. Okay. What all contributions this has made to Indian culture? Can I say this Bhakti movement, it helped in popularizing Hindu religion? Popularizing or making Hindu religion very popular? Popularizing Hindu religion? Yes, yes. And by doing so, you will see that this period where between 8th and 15th century, there was the beginning of Islamic rule in India. Muslim rule has started in India. But in spite of several hundreds of years of Muslim rule in India, Hinduism was still able to preserve itself, and it is believed that this Bhakti movement definitely helped in like preserving the Hindu religion in spite of Islamic rule. So popularized Hindu religion and preserved it, helped in preserving it in spite of the several centuries of Islamic rule. That is the most important contribution of this movement, Bhakti movement, and the literature. Yes. Second, you can also say that it was able to reduce the rigidity of the caste system and the gender inequality. Okay, slightly, not great, but yes, to some extent it did. And can I say it also helped in popularizing the regional languages and promoting them? As a result, even today, India has so much of linguistic diversity. You can say it has come from Bhakti movement has definitely contributed to it. And when literature is associated with music, music, there will be songs and the common people, they are spreading the words. So this also contributed to the music and dance. Music and dance also were enriched by the Bhakti movement. You can also say that yes, it also helped in bringing some kind of Hindu-Muslim unity, because along with Bhakti movement, there was something called Sufi movement among the Muslims. Bhakti movement in Hindus and Sufi movement in Muslims, among the Muslims. And the classic example of Hindu-Muslim unity was Kabir. And last, you can also say that even new religion like Sikhism was born during this period, was born by Guru Nanak. And Guru Nanak was also one of the saint who was writing all these poems and all these things. So you can see what kind of contributions this Bhakti movement and Bhakti literature has made to Indian culture and society. Okay. Now, having said all this, you must also write, as I said, to keep your answer balanced, one or two negative points, which you can say by giving a small heading, limitations. This will be the last heading under your body, limitations, which simply says that yes, although it tried to attack caste system and gender inequality, it could not destroy them, because caste system continued to function and gender inequality also continued to exist. Okay. And you can also say one point, that by emphasizing the importance of religion, it encouraged mysticism, development of mysticism, that is belief in superstitions, too much attachment to religion, etc. All these points you can say as a negative aspect. And then, having done all this, you can give a small conclusion. No need to write conclusion heading there, simply you write a last paragraph, that undoubtedly the Bhakti literature greatly contributed to the Indian society and culture, although there were some limitations. They definitely form an important phase in Indian history. That's just simply summarizing. Okay, that is how you will try to deal with these. That is okay. That is the first question for you all. The Bhakti. Next. I may not really do all the questions in so great depth, but I wanted to do it for one question at least, so that you will understand how the 4S and 3D formula can be applied. The same will go here, true here also. Again, a very straightforward question from modern India about socio-religious reform movements. Okay. Now, let us look at the question. Trace the rise and growth of what? This is the first aspect of the question, with special reference to Young Bengal and Brahmo Samaj. So this will be the second aspect and the third aspect. So three components are there. So now you have to address all the three. Yes. Now introduction, as again, how will be the structure of your answer? Intro, body, conclusion. Now introduction, and what is the key word there? What is the key word? Is this the key word? Is this the key word? No. They are both a subset of this larger word, social religious reform movements. Now obviously you can simply start with a definition of social religious reform movements. You can see, I'll just say that, I'll not write it. As the very name suggests, social religious reform movements were certain movements started by some educated intellectuals of India, starting from Bengal in the 19th century and eventually covering all parts of India, where different intellectuals were trying to address the different problems of Indian society. That's it. It's such a broad definition. You're saying, what are these? Who started them? When did they start? Where did they start? How did they spread? And what they were trying to do? All you have sold in one paragraph, 4 lines, it's done. Already the examiner is clear that I'm not saying you must impress the examiner. No, no need to do all those things. Simply tell, I know this, sir. I know this, madam. That's it. The examiner will be happy. No one is searching for every answer will be like a Kohinoor diamond. Not necessary. Simplicity is the beauty. There is so much of beauty in simplicity. Body. Now when it comes to body, again, here what is the structure? 3 aspects are there. So you can write straight away, give the heading, the causes for rise and growth of social religious reform movements. Because look, trace the rise and growth. Now the question is, why did these reform movements start? That is what you need to write here. 3 bullet points simply is, now why did we all of a sudden start wanting to change our society and religion? Reform means change. Why? Because we came into contact with the Western culture which was superior than us. And that made Indians start thinking like, we are an ancient civilization and these British people are some small country. How did these people defeat us? How did they conquer us? So many people started thinking, and that is one cause what it led to. The second cause is that many Indian leaders were seeing that Indian culture was declining and the Western culture was overwhelming Indian culture. So definitely that was another feeling that they wanted to protect Indian culture from being overwhelmed or overshadowed by Western culture. The third cause is, you'll say that, and they understood one thing clearly, most of these leaders, they had seen the Western countries and they understood there is something we also should learn from them. That doesn't mean that we should completely adopt their own culture and we should forget our culture, not like that. But they understood there was a need to change Indian culture so that it will become suitable to the modern times. So these are the 3 to 4 causes you can write for why did these social religious reform movements start. Okay, what are they? Who started them? Where did they start? When? You have written in the introduction. What are social religious reform movements? Where did they start? When? And all these things you have written down. Now in the body you have written down why they started. Then that's it. You move on to the second and third aspect. Now, like how many social religious reform movements were there in India? There were some, literally speaking, some tens and hundreds of social religious reform movements going on in every different parts of the country. Some people working on women, some people working on caste, some people working in Hindu, some people working in Muslims, some people working in Sikh religion. All religions different, they were trying to address the problems in their society and culture and their religion. Okay, but now he is asking you specifically about 2. So you will write that among the several social religious reform movements that came up in India, there were 2 important, namely this and this. Having said that statement, then you can take up, give a small heading, Young Bengal, write 3-4 points on that, and then Brahmo Samaj, write 3-4 points on that. And then that is all about the body. So you'll write lastly you'll write a conclusion. Now what you will write about Young Bengal, who is the founder, where did it start, and what it wanted to do. Same Brahmo Samaj, who, where, what. When, who started this? Those who have studied, you will understand. Henry Vivian Derozio, he was an Anglo-Indian. He was a very young chap, very young kid, and he was a professor in a college, okay, and he motivated his people, and it started in Bengal, as the very word is suggesting, Bengal, in the 19th century, and he started preaching to the people the principles of modern principles like liberty, equality, fraternity, and he always encouraged questioning everything. But there is one problem with this moment. As I said, positive, negative, slightly balance it. is that they were more radical. They were very radical in their thoughts. That is, you can't change a society which has been there for thousands of years in a few years, in a matter of few months or something. So they were slightly going more radical, and they were also bookish in radicalism. That is, they did not connect with the common people. They were only restricting themselves to the educated sections. What about the masses, the common people who are illiterate people? They have to really change. So one or two negative points also you can write there. The same way, Brahmo Samaj again started by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, and what was the main idea behind starting this Brahmo Samaj was he wanted to mix the best of the West and the East. That is, he did not want complete Western civilization in India. He wanted a mixture of both the Western civilization and the Indian civilization. And he tried to reform. You'll write some points like he attacked the caste system, promoted monotheism. He did not like rituals and all these points which are coming from standard textbooks. You can simply write a few of them. And finally, you can close the question by simply saying that, yes, these socio-religious, you can write the significance, saying that these socio-religious reform movements played a very significant role in inculcating modern values in Indian society. Yes, like modern values like rationality, thinking, questioning everything, thinking with logic and proof, evidence. You don't blindly believe anything. Modern values and all these things, equality and all. Yes, and the second contribution is that it also, by doing so, it also laid a foundation for the future national movement, because all the leaders of national movement who fought for freedom from British actually came from the efforts of the social religious reform movements only. Without these, there can be no national movement. That's it. Okay. For this, that's all. This question. Next. This question is a beautiful question coming from post-independence. Post-independence. Assess what? The main administrative issues, one question, one part, and social cultural problems, that is second component. In what? Integration of princely states, Now, what is the key word here? Princely states, integration of princely states. This is the main process. Inside this process, what are these issues and problems? So the key word is this, larger word is this. So in introduction, you can straight away start by saying that the integration of princely states was a immediate challenge to the national leaders, without doing which, if they, that is what I want to say is, if they could not have integrated princely states, it would have led to disintegration of India. It would have led to the disintegration of India. Or you can also use a technical word if you wish to show off your knowledge, like balkanization of India. That is essentially what are you highlighting in the first point itself, introduction, is that the integration was a dangerous issue. The integration was dangerous, and if it would not have been done properly, India would not have even existed today like a united country. We might have become a small number of different countries. Okay, and then directly going to the body, give a heading, administrative problems inside the body, and after writing administrative problems, you can also highlight social cultural issues, social cultural problems. What were the problems in doing this? And then you will write a conclusion. Here, an administrative problems. What do you think can be administrative problems? If you have studied, you have done your work, you will understand that there were more than 550 princely states, or no? Yes. Imagine integrating 550 princely states into India is not easy. And moreover, were these princely states all concentrated in one part of the country? No, they were scattered across the length and breadth of the country, Yes, that was not easy, And if you look at the governments inside these princely states, they were all autocratic governments. That is, there were no democracies, no autocratic governments. That is, there was no democracy inside them, no democracy inside them. And the governments were so different. In one kingdom, one princely state, one type of government. In some other kingdom, completely separate system of administration. They have a different taxes, they have different taxes, and some other kingdom has its own taxes. They're completely different, very, very different, okay. So, they had different administrative systems and revenue systems. Now, when you integrate them, is it just simply you bring it, is it done? No. When you integrate that kingdom into India, you had to bring some sort of uniformity. As you can clearly see, this was not an easy task, not an easy task. And you can also add that there were problems of like transport and communication. Imagine, just imagine, there is a kingdom inside India there is Hyderabad, there was Hyderabad kingdom ruled by Nizams. Now imagine, if Hyderabad remains an independent kingdom, how difficult it will be for transport and communication of India. So you can also highlight that the transport and communication infrastructure which passed through the princely states, also integrating that also was an important administrative problem. All of these things you can actually highlight. Yes, yes. And then coming to social cultural problems, you can say again many issues are there. There was the dimension of religion, there was the dimension of language, there was the dimension of culture, okay. For example, religious dimension, if you'll say is like that there were many kingdoms where the ruler was Muslim and the people were Hindus. Like for example Hyderabad, the ruler was Nizam, and there were some other states where ruler was Hindu and people were Muslims, like Jammu and Kashmir, there the ruler was Hari Singh. Now you see, don't you think that is a very awkward situation? A Muslim ruler ruling over majority Hindu population, a Hindu ruler ruling over majority Muslim population. And this kind of clashes was also contributing to many problems in integrating these princely states. Language, many of these kingdoms, these princely states, they did not have a same language. They were a group of languages inside them. Again, you can give that most of these kingdoms, like for example Hyderabad, again you can give example and become specific, be specific to your answer. Hyderabad, you will say that it has comprised of people speaking Urdu speaking Muslims, Telugu speakers, Kannada speakers, Marathi speakers, even some of them were Tamilian speakers also. Now imagine now how difficult it would be. You can't simply take Hyderabad into India. If you take Hyderabad into India, then the Marathi area must go to Maharashtra, Kannada area must go to Karnataka, Telugu area must go to Andhra. So all these problems were creating, it was not so easy to handle them. Okay, you can also talk about the cultural aspects. That is, for example, in northeastern India, which integration, again it became a great problem because most of the people living there were tribal people and their culture was so different from the mainstream culture of India. And again, particularly you can take the mention of Manipur. The integration of Manipur created a lot of problems for us. Okay, anything else? Yeah, I think these all you can definitely highlight as socio-cultural problems. So now, just see, it is easy process. Again, I am not trying to say that UPSC is easy, but still, if you have done your work, if you have did a lot of practice, you can write, you can do justice, and then finally you can write a conclusion for this, simply saying that yes, there were two people, important people who addressed this, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel and his secretary VP Menon. You can say both of them had done a brilliant job, and in spite of all these problems, they succeeded in integrating princely states into India. Although there is one problem, that is Jammu and Kashmir has created a problem. Okay, that's all these things, and you can justify your answer. Fine. Next, let us move to the next question. To what extent did the role of the moderates prepare a base for the wider freedom movement. So moderates, how did their role prepare a base for the wider movement, the future wider movement? So what is the key word here? Moderates, role of the moderates, clear. So again, introduction, you can start giving definition of moderates. Who are the moderates? Moderates, you'll say the moderate leaders, bracket you can also mention the years so that you will become more specific. So moderate leaders like Dadabhai Nauroji, Badruddin Tyabji, Dinsha Wacha, you can write several of them, Gopalakrishna Gokhale, etc. Moderate leaders like all these people represented, who are these people? They represented the most progressive, they represented the most educationally, sorry, one second. They represented the educationally, economically and politically the most progressive and enlightened sections of Indian society at that time. Yes. Other people were not exposed to the Western culture and the modern technologies and all, but these people, educational, economic and politically, they were all advanced, the most advanced section of that society, Indian society at that time. Okay, so you can clearly see again, I have written the importance of those people. Who are they? Some names we have given, the years also we have given. How are they special? That also I have told in one line itself. Then goes the body. In the body, again, what is the question? Role of these people for wider freedom movement. So simply nothing but you can give that their contributions to national movement, the freedom movement, contributions to freedom movement. Now, if you have read your, if you have done your basic study, you will understand that the moderates definitely played a great role for the national movement of this country. Okay. There you will see that first you can say that it was these people who established a all India platform called Indian National Congress. Without this body, will the next generation leaders, the extremists, the Gandhians and all these people, can they come together and take the movement in organized manner at a national level? Not possible. So the first and the most important contribution of the moderates was that they established a national all India platform, that is the INC in 1885, which provided a common platform for leaders from different parts of the country to come and take the movement in an organized manner, That is the one great contribution of these people. Without Congress, where will Gandhi come from? Gandhi led Congress. No, but where did Congress come from? It was these people. Second, that is one contribution, okay. The second contribution you might have heard, several moderate leaders like Dadabhai Nauroji, R.C. Dutt, etc., they analyzed the British rule rationally. They saw why the British is ruling us. They are saying that they are ruling us for our good. But these people applied their rational analysis of British rule, rationally analyzed the British rule and exposed the real exploitative nature of the British rule. Yes or no? How? By the drain of wealth theory. And they clearly told the Indian leaders, other young generations, that the British is responsible for India's poverty because they are draining our wealth, they are taking away our wealth, they are looting us. So by exposing the mechanism by which the British were exploiting India, these people have this is technically called as economic critique of the British rule, okay. By doing it, what did they essentially do? They actually weakened the moral foundations of British rule in India. Yes, because any government will sustain only till the people feel that the government is doing good for them. But once the moment the people will understand that this government is actual the problem, they will start revolting against it. So by exposing the real nature of British rule, they have done the second important contribution, telling the next generation leaders that as long as British will be there, they will keep exploiting India, and if you people don't raise your voice, they will continue to exploit. Okay. So the third contribution, you can say that these people were not only requesting the government, but they also carried on active propaganda. Propaganda means spreading knowledge, propaganda through press, newspapers, through the printing press, and they were communicating what all the government was doing. If government does anything, they will write in the newspaper, so that people will understand and know what is happening, so that they will start questioning the government. So what they were essentially trying to do, through the newspapers, they were spreading modern ideas. They were spreading modern ideas. They were trying to unite the Indian people. They were trying to unite Indian people. They were trying to reform Indian society, and they were exposing government activities, and essentially main point is they were politically awakening the people of India, telling them that you must raise your voice. If not, they will continue to do like that only. If you start speaking, if you come and you do something, then the British will listen to you. If you don't say anything, what will they will keep continuing whatever they're doing. So all these contributions of moderates, definitely you cannot underplay them. Okay, you can write all these points. Okay. Next, again, as I said, how much ever positives you may write, try to write 1 or 2 negatives. Give a small heading and say, although they made a great contributions, they had some limitations also. The most important limitation of these people was that they did not believe in the capacity of masses, that is the common people, the illiterate people. These people, the leaders, these original leaders of this era, they did not go into the villages. They did not talk to the common man. They thought that India was not ready, so right now we cannot go and arouse the masses. But actually the point is, that is what they had to do. But then we cannot blame these people beyond a certain point, because the circumstances in which these moderates were functioning was not easy. The British government was carefully watching the Congress always. Who are these people? What are they doing? And imagine if Congress would have taken a radical stance against the British, there was a full chance that the British would have suppressed them or no. There itself they would have closed it. They would have closed the chapter. But then that is why these people did not go completely anti-British. That's why they never asked independence. Because if they would have done it, they knew that the Indian people are just in a baby stage. They are developing. If you react now, if you become radical, you will be suppressed. So they were very patient. They were calm, and they kept their patience. Okay, that you can all these points you can write in the conclusion. That you can simply say yes. The moderates, the achievements of the moderates may be minimal. That is, they may not have made great achievements, but still, we must understand their environment in which they were functioning. Yes, any radicalism by them would have led to the crushing of the Congress itself. The British government would have crushed the Congress itself. So, but then they did not do like that. They were slowly building the momentum. And in fact, if the later phases, the extremists and Gandhi were able to take the national movement forward, it was mainly because of the contribution of the moderates. All these points. Again, very straightforward questions this time from the UPSC. Next. Bring out the constructive program of Mahatma Gandhi. Again, very clearly, the key point is constructive program of Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, during non-cooperation movement and civil disobedience movement. Very straightforward question. Again, you can, all these things we will discuss in the class, and you can find them in the basic textbooks, okay? Again, I'll be a bit brief now, because I've already done a good amount of detailed discussion on all these topics. You'll simply say, now introduction. In introduction, what is the key word? Constructive work. Bring out the constructive programs. That's it, simply. So you will start writing a definition of constructive work or constructive program. What do you mean by constructive program? Now, if you have read your Modern India and National Movement properly, you will understand that Gandhi had a special strategy called STS strategy: struggle, truce, struggle. Struggle means active phase followed by a passive phase and then an active phase. That is, Gandhi was very, very aware of the psychology of the people, and he knows how to provoke the people. And when the people are provoked or the mass movement has started, he knows that mass movement cannot go forever. The mass movement has generally must have an active phase, and you must give some gap to the people so that they will take rest. And in this period, when they take rest, you will actually do some extra activities, and those activities are called the constructive work. And then once people have been given a small gap, and then you can again start another active phase. So that is what Gandhi is trying to say. So constructive work comes where? Constructive work comes particularly in the passive phase. Passive phase, that is here. So you will simply say in the definition that the constructive work of Gandhi was a part of the larger strategy called struggle, truce, struggle, which he believed was most suitable for sustaining mass movements on a high pitch for a long time. Simple, one line you finish it off, and the examiner will understand what you really are trying to communicate. Okay? Because mass movements, you cannot go forever like this. No, it has to be like this. And in the active phase, everyone is doing. But what you will do in the passive phase, you don't waste time. Okay? And in that passive phase, you are going to do constructive work. That is what you have told in the introduction. And in the body, what all you will say? In the body, constructive work. Now, what did these people do in the constructive work? Simple here. Gandhi believed that getting freedom from British is important. But British will go away. When the British will go away, what about India? Is there not Indian society, Indian economy also must be in a good condition or no? Yes. So he believed that in the body you will write that the components of constructive work, components of constructive program. What are all the component? You will write economic component. Is there economic component or no? Yes. That is, Gandhi always focused on khadi and village industries for reviving the village economy. Educational, did they talk about education? Yes, they said we will not go for government Western education, we will go for our own education. And that's why in non-cooperation movement, you will find many universities, Indian institutions like Jamia Millia Islamia University for the Muslims. For Hindus, there were Gujarat Vidyapeeth, Kashi Vidyapeeth, so many things had come up during the non-cooperation movement, especially with respect to education. And they also were focusing on social issues like caste system, that is removing untouchability, plus the Hindu-Muslim unity, working on the Hindu-Muslim unity, all of these things also you can say. And particularly with civil disobedience movement, I am trying to be specific by adding some extra points, because they asked you in non-cooperation movement, also in civil disobedience movement. So I am writing one point about non-cooperation here, one point about civil disobedience here. So in civil disobedience, particularly with respect to untouchability, Gandhi undertook the Harijan Sevak Sangh, that Harijan campaign. He wrote some books called, the weekly called Harijan. He established an organization called Harijan Sevak Sangh, and all these things, components you can write as part of it, And then politically, what is the political component? You will say that they were educating the people. Gandhi used to write articles, all these, that is, in the passive phase, Gandhi is not simply silently sitting in his ashram and enjoying, no. He is doing something, he is writing articles and educating the people, and he was strengthening the Congress organization. He was preparing new generation leaders, next leaders, and in a way, what was Gandhi doing all this time? He was preparing the people for the next active phase. He was preparing the people for the next active phase. Yes, yes. So now tell me, do you think this constructive movement has helped a lot during these things? 100%. So that is the credit we can give to Gandhi. Now you see, you have reckoned so many dimensions in the body: economic, educational, social, political, yes. And you have given the logic in the first itself. And finally, you can say in the conclusion, saying that undoubtedly again, the constructive work of Gandhi proved very, very important in sustaining the national movement and finally leading us to the freedom in 1947. That brings me to the last question, which is coming from world history. Again, a very beautiful question. Again, you will be able to answer this only if you are good at concepts. Otherwise, it's not possible. Now, there arose a serious challenge to the democratic state system. A challenge to democratic state system when? Between the two world wars. That is the question. Okay, evaluate. Now you'll see, again introduction, what is the keyword there? Clear? Challenge to democratic political systems. When? Between world wars, between the two world wars. Now, if you have studied your world history, you will clearly understand one thing, that the World War I went on for, you be specific with the years, okay? It will help you in the exam. World War I, it went on for 4.5 years. 4.5 years. Now, don't you think this would have caused a lot of destruction to the European powers which involved in this? Yes. So, the World War I, which went on for nearly 4.5 years during this period, during these years, created havoc in Europe, particularly in Europe. And that is, it created a havoc in Europe economically and politically, both ways. Europe was damaged. What happened? You'll say that in the country, in the introduction itself, that the European economy was shattered. And the European countries were suffering from political instability. Why? Because war has happened, 5 years of war here. Imagine soon after the war, you think everything will be very fine? No, the economy is gone, the politics, it's unstable and all these things. And to tackle such situations, a new type of governments emerged. Which were anti-democratic. Yes. So, in the first introduction, you may have written 1 or 2 extra points, but then 1 or 2 extra lines, but then everything relevant, no? What are you saying? That after the World War, the European conditions were not good. Economically, Europe was shattered. Politically, Europe was going through unstable conditions. So naturally, to tackle such situations, what kind of governments will come? They will come anti-democratic governments, that you can say in the introduction. And then you can go to the body, and this is very important, because in the body you will write what are these anti-democratic governments, where did they come? And here you can write as part of the body is that you can write simply the different anti-democratic governments. What are those? You can write like this. In Italy, it took the form of fascism, and the leader was Mussolini, Benito Mussolini. In Germany, it was Nazism, and it was Hitler, Adolf Hitler. In Russia, it was communism. And it was led by Lenin and then by Stalin. And in Japan, it was militarism, and it was Emperor Tojo and Hirohito. These were the leaders here, Hirohito. So you can see that, and you can, if you wish, you can even, if you have a good map skilling, drawing a map, you can even draw a rough map and write down these names. You are being specific, you are addressing that where all these governments came, anti-democratic, they came in all these areas, and who were the leaders and their names also you written down. And then going ahead in the body, you can say the features, their features, what are the important features of these governments. They are anti-democratic, no? Which means they don't have opposition parties. It is all single party rule. Only one party will rule, single party rule, and there will be a dictator like Hitler and all these people, and there is no elections, no criticism against the government, no one can criticize the government, no free media, no judiciary, no independent judiciary, that is, there is no authority to check the power of the government. People don't have fundamental rights. All these points you can write down, okay. And then finally, to conclude, you can say that yes, the world, particularly Europe, was going through a very turbulent phase in this period, and eventually all these anti-democratic governments that came led the world to the Second World War. And by saying that, you can close it. Okay. I hope I'm done with this. I hope the session was beneficial for you all. Thank you so much. And if you have liked the video, kindly visit the AKS IAS website, and you can contact our staff for any further information. And let me close with last one small advice. No pain, no gain. No one becomes great or good without any work. You must put a lot of work, but that work must be smart. Learn from the toppers. Don't simply waste time reading, because how much ever you read, finally in the examination you have only 10 minutes to write the answer, 8 minutes to write the answer, okay. So not just reading, after reading any topic, any subject, you try to write it down, take 1 or 2 previous questions and write them down, and see that, and compare your answer with the toppers, understand where you are lagging. Only this is the way that you will be able to tackle the examination, okay. Thank you so much.
This video is brought to you by AKS IAS.